Hi, I'm Ray Riley from the Art Gallery Committee. Our current show has been a big hit. Many thanks to our resident art collectors who have let us enjoy their artworks in our gallery. We thought you might like to learn a little bit more about some of the artwork, so we asked several residents to share those stories with us. We're going to start with Carolyn Johns, who will talk about two paintings in the collection that she and Chuck have. Hi, Carolyn. Thanks so much for coming over to share some information about your artworks.
Happy to do it, Ray.
Good. So why did you choose these two paintings for our exhibition?
Well, Chuck and I and our family lived in the Philippine Islands for 2 years. It was a really special experience for us, and we thought this would be a way to share a bit of that with our Green Hills friends.
Well, let's start with the rural life painting. Who painted it?
The artist was Jose D. Castro. He was known for townscapes, for painting rural scenes. He was actually born in 1908, so when we were in the Philippines in 1970, 72, he would have been in his 60s. He died at 86, so he is no longer painting. As a young man, he was invited by a well-known artist to come to his studio in Manila, and so he did have formal art lessons, and so that's what I know about him.
That's pretty good, you know. Why is this painting special to you?
Well, because Chuck went over to be at his assignment at Clark Air Base, and I followed with our 3 children, ages 5, 3, and 6 months, and it took me 3 days by plane, bus, airplane, whatever, you know, to get there. And I hadn't slept in that whole time. So we landed, and he, of course, was well rested, well groomed, had a car, and he took us, the 4 of us, in the car, and he had this plan. And so he drove us through a rural barrio, thinking that I would think that was where we were going to stay, in a hut on stilts with dogs and pigs and things and chickens running around underneath. I was oblivious. I was so tired I couldn't, if I was going to be in a hut, I was going to be in a hut. So that memory kind of comes back when I see this kind of a scene.
That was quite a trick.
Yeah, it was.
So why did you title it Barrio Scene?
Well, that was what they called these areas where families lived in closeness to each other and with their animals and their kids. And so that was the term that I knew. Unfortunately, I did this week do a little online Googling of Philippine barrios. In Angelesi is where we were. And what it means now is it's a red light district with human trafficking, and so I do want people to know that back then it wasn't that.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the other painting now.
Okay.
What do you know about this artist?
Well, this artist was actually more famous than the previous one, Castro. His name is Roger San Miguel. He has had exhibits all over internationally, and he has been called the father of Filipino Impressionism. What you see here, which I didn't know when we bought it, we just liked it, but he paints with vibrant colors, he does simple objects, and he uses broad, strong brush strokes. And when I read about that recently, I thought, well, yes, I see that, but I didn't know it at the time.
What we learn.
Yes,
yeah.
right.
Okay, anything else?
I would just credit Chuck, actually, for being the person in our family that really was the lead in collecting art, paintings. We lived off base in Angelesi, and he was on base at Clark Air Base, and so when he'd come home, he would very often stop at shops and see what they had, and then of course we'd go and look. And our 2 criteria were, did we like it, and could we afford it?
Those are good. Those are
That was
good.
it. So, yeah, I'm happy to share these couple examples of things. You know, one of the reasons I chose them actually was they were small, light, and easy to carry over here.
Those are good criteria
Yeah.
too. Thanks so much, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
Next we have Paula Toms. And I'd like to know, how did you happen to acquire that very lovely painting?
I bought this picture at I say it was art in the park, and I thought it was somehow through the Octagon. But the other night I had this revelation as I was brushing my teeth, that I bought this up at the church by Car Hardware, and it was on fences that the artwork was displayed. And I bought 2 pictures at the time. They were both of trees. I don't know why I did trees that day. They're one of the few, honest to goodness, real oil paintings that I own. And over the years, I've really become partial to it.
So what do you really love about it?
I like the colors. I like that, to me, it's very tranquil. I don't know if it is to anybody else, but I call it tranquility. No, I call it serenity. So that's what I like about it.
So I know this has an interesting story, so why don't you tell us about the provenance of this painting?
I bought this picture, had no idea who the artist was. All I knew it was somebody from Ames. And when they were getting ready for this art display here, I got a call and said, did I have anything that I would like to show? And I said, well, I do have 2 oil paintings, and both of them were Ames artists. And so I sent a picture to Barb, and she said, who were the artists? And so I'm trying to read the name across the table, and I'm going Angel. I said, do you think that's Angelesi? And she said, I think it might be. She had no idea. We did not know that Elizabeth was this great an artist. And so later that day, I looked out the window and Elizabeth was walking down the street, and I said, come in here and look at this picture because I think it's yours. And when she looked at it, she said, it is mine. So I have enjoyed it for 40 years.
That is such a good story.
Yes. So I'm hoping my children will enjoy it afterwards.
Mm-hmm. We'll hope.
Yeah.
And here we have the artist, Elizabeth Angelesi. So tell me, I know you're a scientist, and since you were trained that way, how did you get into painting?
Well, this was a hobby, and I took a class through Parks and Rec a long time ago, probably in the 70s, with Lockie Schuster. We did oil painting, and there was a group of us that decided we wanted to study with her. So we continued to have classes weekly where we painted in the morning, had lunch, and went home. It was a fun group. People came and went over the years. Some died, and Lockie died probably 10, 12 years ago. But we continued to paint together, and at some point Lockie encouraged us to start selling paintings, because what are you going to do with these, okay? So we had something called the Backyard Art Sale, which literally took place in the backyard of one of our artists' homes. And at some point she left the world and we had to move to someplace else. So we would rent some fence space someplace and still have the Backyard Art Sale. Over the years, we painted together. I stayed with it probably until the 80s, when I got interested in something else which consumed all my time. And so I left the group and haven't painted since really probably the late 80s. And I was really surprised when Paula said, oh, I think I have a painting of yours. So here we are years later, and I'm amazed to find something at Green Hills that I had painted a long time ago.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, Loanne. You have an artwork that I just love.
Me too.
And I'd like to know, what made you choose the picture for us?
Well, actually, Ray, I did have 3 reasons. One, because I really love the artwork. It just when I first saw it, it was just, this is wonderful. Secondly, because of the author, the artist has a connection to Iowa, a very strong connection to Iowa in terms of her art. And the third one was because of the way I acquired it. It also has a sentimental value to me.
So now you have to tell us, how did you acquire it?
In the 90s, late 90s, my husband and I moved to Muscatine, Iowa. And I had a group of friends that wanted to show me all the wonders of Iowa City, which was just great. And on one of our jaunts there, the School of Art had an exhibit in which they had works of art that their former students had done. And there she was. I went home and thought about this, and I kept thinking about this picture, so I called the art school, and that the picture was not at that time in their collection. They had borrowed it, and they didn't have any prints. So they suggested I try the Art Institute, and because she had worked there, and they apparently had one of the prints in their permanent collection. So I called the Art Institute in Chicago. No, they did have the picture in their permanent collection, but they didn't have any prints. So I kind of forgot about it, and I happened to be talking to a friend of mine who lived in Kansas, and we talked about the picture and how much I enjoyed it, and I told her she would really enjoy it also. Maybe she could find it somewhere to see. Well, I forgot about the whole issue, and about 4 or 5 months later, I received a package from the University of Iowa Library, the University of Kansas Library, and there she was. Thanks to my girlfriend, who I guess used her influence as a trustee in the library to to figure it out, but I did receive the print, and so that's my sentimental value. So.
Oh my goodness, that is just quite a story. So, who was the artist?
The artist was Elizabeth Catlett, and she was Alice Elizabeth Catlett, and she was born in, I gotta get the year right because I have many years here, in 1915. Her mother was a school teacher and a truant officer. I don't know if she had both at the same time, but in the Washington, D.C. schools. And Elizabeth's father died shortly after she was born, but he was a math teacher at Tuskegee Institute. Elizabeth was basically raised by her mother then and her paternal grandmother, who lived in North Carolina, and had many stories for her about sharecropping and the slave experience. Elizabeth went to school in Washington, D.C., and she was actually awarded a scholarship to continue her work at the Carnegie Institute. However, she couldn't go there when they found out that she was black. So she then went to Howard, got a bachelor in fine arts, and taught, because that's what you do. You can't make a living as a black woman doing art, so she became a teacher. But after a few years, she came to the University of Iowa. The reason for that appeared to be that she was intrigued by the work of Grant Wood, who was teaching there at that time. And indeed, he apparently did have a big influence on her, at least in terms of continuing the kind of work that she did, which basically is women, black people, and later on working class people. When she came to the University of Iowa, she said, I'm to read the quote that she got from Grant Wood. She said he was one of the first people, and he told his students that to paint, you must paint what you most intimately know and love. And that's what she did. He also was a mentor to her in helping her get her, she was also a sculptor, and she has many, many works of sculpting, is that what we call them? You know? And he started her on that because he convinced her that perhaps she wanted to do some carvings of African women, which she did. She graduated in 1940 with a Master in Fine Arts, and she was the first black woman to achieve that at the University of Iowa.
That is such a good story. Now, I need to ask you about a detail. I notice you are wearing a particular pin, and how does that relate?
I am so glad you noticed, because if you will notice, on Sharecropper, she is wearing a pin to keep her garment together. That is not a form of jewelry for her. I mean, it may be, but it is also the way she kept her clothes together.
Yeah.
And it is a very noted feature in the work that she did.
Yeah, she has such dignity, and then you realize
She does.
that she has to hold her jacket together with a safety pin. Yeah. Now I understand you have a picture of Elizabeth.
I do. When I was looking up things about her and her life, and she spent a great deal of time in Mexico, and she went back and forth between Mexico and the United States, because as her artwork grew and her fame grew and her commitment to the community, the black community, grew, people were interested in having her speak. Most of the pictures I found of her showed a very vibrant looking, tall woman, always looking very energetic and very happy. However, I found a picture of her. She lived to be 96. This was obviously a picture taken when she was in her 90s. And I was struck by the look that whoever took the picture, was able to capture. Because to me, she looked just like her 1952 sharecropper.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she does indeed. Well, Luann, thanks so much. This has been wonderful, and I'm so glad to hear more about that particular print, because it's a favorite of mine too.
Well, you can go to the University of Iowa now, because they now have 28 of her prints, which were used to establish she gave the money back so they could establish a scholarship fund.
And we have 2 prints of hers at the library at Iowa State.
I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah, it's a recent acquisition. Mm-hmm, yeah.
Good.
Well, thanks so much,
You're
Luann.
welcome.
Well, next we have David Gradwall, who has really a very interesting story to tell about his artworks.
The name of this art piece is Limehouse, and the artist is James McNeill Whistler, an American 19th century artist. He was born in Lowell, Massachusetts on July 11th, 1834, and he died in London, England on July 17th, 1903 at age 69, and he's buried along with his wife in London. Whistler is perhaps known best for his oil painting, Whistler's Mother, which he completed in 1871. This piece is rather well known and has been parodied about as much as American Gothic, but it's really a rather nice lateral profile picture of his mother, a kindly faced woman in her bonnet, a very 19th century Victorian matron. The piece itself, Limehouse, Whistler did in 1859, and it was part of his Thames River series, which is a series of etchings and dry points of scenes along the Thames River harbor in London. Ships coming in, being unloaded and loaded, and pictures of dock workers and so forth. The medium in this case is etching and dry point. Dry point is similar to engraving. And this process involves usually a copper plate. Other metals can be used, but usually it's copper. And it's covered with wax. And then the artist incises designs or does them in applique and the wax, and this determines how dark and how light and where the lines go. The wax is then covered with acid, and the acid burns into the plate. And if the artist doesn't like the first appearance, it can be then further modified with more wax and so forth. This etching was purchased by my mother's great uncle, my great uncle, Dr. Emil Mayer. Dr. Mayer, my great uncle, was a world-renowned otolaryngologist. He dealt with eyes, nose, and throat. And he was internationally known, gave talks and wrote papers in English, French, and German for various international journals. He also invented an early form of a flexible laryngoscope, which is the device they use if you swallow something like a button or a safety pin. They could go down your gullet and retrieve it before it does any damage. He was quite well to do. He and his wife Lily never had any children, but he had many nieces and a few nephews. And my mother was one of his favorite nieces. He bought this painting, this etching, in 1903. This is the original label, which you cannot read, so I'll read it for you. He bought it from Frederick Keppel and Company, Rare Engravings and Etchings, in 1903. Keppel's was located at number 20 East 16th Street in New York City. Emil then gave it to my mother, Elaine Mayer Gradwall, and I believe that this was in his will. He gave her actually several etchings and at least one painting, which we have. Some of them were gifts before he died, and some of them were bequests in his will. My mother is the only one of our family who never finished college, but she was smarter than the rest of us with degrees because she read voraciously. She did go to Rockford College for a year or two, but dropped out to take care of her ailing father in Norfolk, Nebraska. But she read books, 8 to 10 books a week, some of them within the Great Books series and some on her own. Every afternoon she would retire to her chaise-longue in the bedroom and read for several hours. And this piece of art is of particular interest to me because it was my mother's and one of her favorite pieces, and because she used it to tell me about the process of etching and dry point. And one reason that this is unique is that in addition to buying the print of Limehouse, Dr. Mayer was able to buy a print of the destroyed plate. So you can see here the image, but it has these crisscross lines, which they would do. They would draw these lines on the actual copper plate and then make a print after the desired number of prints were made. I do not know how many prints were made. This one is not numbered, the one that we have. An art expert could maybe tell where within the series. I've not had that done. So these had a special meaning to me because they were the artifacts my mother used to explain the process of etching and destroying the plate. And my mother explained many other things, brought a love of art to me. She was not an artist, nor am I, but we certainly appreciate the art.
So, out of all of your collection, huge collection, why did you pick this particular artwork for the show?
Two reasons, I would say. One is because Whistler is a famous artist that people probably would have heard of. And secondly, because this print of the struck plate is, if it's not unique, it's extremely rare. I don't know whether there are any others available or not. They may be, but I've never seen one online.
Well, thanks, David. This has been great.
Thank you. My pleasure.